follow the example of the last councils and be very short in my introduction and let you have more time for the questions. To tell you the truth, when I was coming in this morning, I was not expecting necessarily to have conclusions on the 2 points we had on the agenda today. The first 2 points, namely Syria and the Turkish drilling activities in the Eastern Mediterranean. This could have been possible, but this could have also been useful if it was just a preparation for the European Council that takes place later this week. After long discussions and work with the ministers, and I want to thank them all because they showed a lot of commitment to finding a common European Union approach to both issues that are separate but somehow connected in some respect. We've managed to find consensus, so we have a common, united European Union position. First of all, on the developments in the northeast of Syria. I imagine you have seen the Council conclusions already, so you have seen that there is a clear condemnation from the European Union side of Turkey's military action in the northeast of Syria. There is a strong support for the UN-mediated political process, and I'm grateful to the UN Special Envoy Pedersen that has joined us this morning, briefing us on the state of play and also the perspectives and also the difficulties of the political process under his auspices to be restarted in Geneva. I want to say very clearly there is a strong support from our side, in the first place, to the beginning of the work of the Constitutional Committee. We believe that it has been extremely important, the fact that he has managed to find an agreement for the first time ever on the constitution of this Constitutional Committee. So we definitely want to see this starting to work in Geneva, and we're ready to support it. There is also a common, clear position of the European Union and the Member States on our support and our common commitment to the global coalition against Daesh. You might have seen in the conclusions we call for a ministerial meeting of the global coalition, because we see as one of the most immediate consequences of this military activities in the northeast of Syria the fact that Daesh could re-find its breathing space inside that territory. That worries us enormously. This is a direct security threat to the European Union, not only to the European Union, first and foremost to the region and the international community. So we want to see this tackled in the global coalition format. And there is obviously also our strong commitment, as usual, to the stability of the region. And let me say that, in particular, any attempt to have any kind of demographic engineering in that region would be seen from our side as particularly dangerous. There is also a commitment that Member States have taken to have clear and strong national positions regarding their arms export policy to Turkey. We have a common position on arms export control, and they all committed to apply that framework to their exports of arms to Turkey. And obviously, we reaffirmed the commitment we have in terms of addressing the serious humanitarian crisis and refugee crisis in light of the evolving needs. And I was able to debrief the ministers of also the call that I had with Under Secretary General Lowcock that was in Gaziantep in the recent days, and our strong determination to support, in particular, the countries in the region that are facing important consequences in terms of humanitarian and refugee crisis. When it comes to the Council conclusions on the illegal drilling activities in the Eastern Mediterranean, there is a clear recalling of the conclusions we adopted already in July, and in particular the need to address the delimitation of the exclusive economic zone and continental shelf through dialogue and negotiations in good faith, in full respect of international law and in accordance with the principle of good neighbourly relations. And there is the agreement among all member states to put in place a framework regime of restrictive measures targeting natural and legal persons responsible for or involved in the illegal drilling activities in the Eastern Mediterranean. So I will present, together with the Commission, the legal proposals to this effect in the coming days. Let me add that we had another important point on the agenda today. We welcomed the new Foreign Minister of Ukraine. We received from him a very comprehensive and, I would say, satisfactory picture of the plans that the government and the administration have on the reform agenda of the country, but also on how to address the conflict in the east of Ukraine. We've seen some positive developments. We're very much willing to support them, and we reconfirmed to him, and obviously through him to all the Ukrainian people, the European Union's strong determination to support Ukraine, its sovereignty, its territorial integrity, our non-recognition policy of the illegal annexation of Crimea and Sebastopol, and even, or as important than that, our determination to continue to fully support Ukraine's reform agenda. As you know, the European Union has put in place the highest amount of EU assistance to any third country for Ukraine. We're talking about 15 billion euros over the last years, and we have a very ambitious association agreement in place, a visa-free regime in place. We are determined to continue to support Ukraine and Ukrainian people in these times. I will stop here. And yes, due to the fact that the discussion on the northeast of Syria and of the drillings took longer than expected, actually it was quite expected, I would say, we will postpone the point that was foreseen on Afghanistan to the next Foreign Affairs Council in November.
Thank you very much. Now it's time for your questions. Please, as usual, introduce yourself and the media you're working for. And I'll start with Efi at the back.
Hi, this is Efi Kutsakosta from Euronews. I have actually two questions. One is regarding the illegal drillings of Turkey in the Eastern Mediterranean. If you have any concrete time frame, when are you going to propose these restrictive measures to the Council? And should we expect something during the meeting of the leaders this week? And the second question is, because you said that the EU was fully united regarding these two decisions, what do you have to say for the fact that the Hungarian foreign minister decided to go to a meeting in Baku along with Turkey to discuss even about business? Doesn't this undermine the message of unity that you want to send? Thank you.
Every member state is responsible for the consistency of its policy positions. Here we had a unanimous decision taken. No member state opposed to that. On the contrary, each and every member state, each of the 28, contributed actively to the wording of the conclusions, both of them, none excluded. And there is, as I said, unanimity, full consensus on these two sets of conclusions. Then it's up to single ministers or member states to guarantee their internal cohesion and consistency of their policies. When it comes to the time framework, I cannot give you details about the timing, also because it depends on the technical preparation that it will be now required for our services to put in place the legal provisions that will be then proposed to the Council working groups, but the political decision is taken today. And I think this is the main message that comes from the Council on the drillings, and that is that the political decision is taken today. The 28 member states agreed to put in place the framework of restrictive measures, and now the technical steps will follow.
Thanks a lot. Lawrence Norman of the Wall Street Journal. Since this may or may not be your last Foreign Affairs Council, I will ask two questions. both on Turkey. You mentioned the EU call for a ministerial meeting of the anti-ISIS coalition. My understanding is the French have been calling for this for days. Why has this not happened? Is it fundamentally because Washington is not keen to press Turkey to end an offensive that it seems to have green-lighted? And second question, when you came into office those very, very, very long 5 years ago, I remember one of your key goals was to rejuvenate the Turkey relationship. Very early on there was a big EU mission to Turkey about getting the relationship going again, etc., etc. What went wrong?
First of all, you shouldn't ask me, and I answer both questions. Remember that for November, and you skipped me one in case I'm still here. On the global coalition against Daesh, it is not for the European Union or for any of our member states to convene the ministerial meeting. As you know, it's a global coalition that is led by the United States. You should ask them and not me why it has not been convened yet. But it is a general feeling of all the EU member states that that is the appropriate format that needs to convene to address one specific issue that is extremely serious for all of us in Europe, but also, I believe, internationally, that is how to make sure that the current military activities in the northeast of Syria don't open up the space for Daesh to have a sort of resurrection, because Daesh has never been completely defeated. It has been significantly defeated from a territorial point of view, but we've always warned, and warned ourselves, first of all, but also others in the global coalition against Daesh, that this defeat was still to be considered something to be consolidated, not only on the ground, but also on the political environment that could have been again conducive to Daesh to regather forces. And we have a very serious concern about the fact that this military activity that Turkey is undertaking in the northeast of Syria is reopening the way for Daesh to rebuild its territorial gains and also to recruit not only the foreign fighters but also the local forces that it used to have in the northeast of Syria. So there is a serious concern. That is a security priority for Europeans. And as the global coalition against Daesh has been effective in these last years under US leadership to achieve a lot in terms of defeating Daesh, and this is relevant not only for Europeans, it's relevant for Syrians, obviously, it's relevant for Iraqis. I spoke to the Iraqi president just a few days ago, and we agreed on how relevant and important it is to consolidate the gains we had in the fight against Daesh, and to focus, I said it already in the debate in the European Parliament last Wednesday, and to focus on our common fight against the UN-listed terrorist organizations. This is something that unites us, has always united us so far, and we believe that it is important to have that discussion in the anti-Daesh coalition. Not Washington to convene this. We are doing that today in a very formal way. We will see what the answer will be. And then Turkey. Listen, we have here today two conclusions, two formal positions of the European Union that are important ones. One on the drilling activities of Turkey in the Eastern Mediterranean, and one on the Turkish military activities in the northeast of Syria. These are heavy conclusions, and I believe that it will not go unnoticed, not only in Ankara but also elsewhere. Having said that, and I tell you this not only on a personal note but also reflecting, and I'm sure about this, reflecting the general feeling of the EU member states. The situation in Syria and the situation in the Eastern Mediterranean doesn't cover all the fields on which our relationship with Turkey is important. There are other issues from people-to-people contacts to energy or common work that we could do in other areas. We've always tried to build constructive partnerships with Turkey. Sometimes it has worked, sometimes it has not worked. We have lived dramatic moments. Turkey has lived dramatic moments. We should never forget. In July 2015, a dramatic attempted coup, when we expressed our strongest solidarity to the institutions and the people of Turkey. It is not a kind of relationship that you can define as a black and white one. It's a complex, multi-layered, dimensional partnership, and I believe that when the European Union and Turkey also manages to be clear, extremely clear on what we see we agree upon and what we do not agree upon, this helps us also addressing other issues in a clearer way, in a more direct way. I think we need, as neighbours that share the same geographical space, we need to be clear with each other, knowing that we share a lot of common interests, starting from the security of the region, but we also have some disagreements. Again, no mystery that Turkey considers as terrorist organizations some organizations that the European Union doesn't consider terrorist organizations. This has always been a point of difference between us. This doesn't mean that we cannot agree on other things, but this doesn't mean that we have to hide the fact that we disagree on something. And I think that today we've done a good exercise of clarity from our side that might help us also being clear on other issues that might be more positive in the future.
Hi, Ruud Mikkers, The Telegraaf, Netherlands. I have a question concerning the weapon export to Turkey. It's not an official embargo. Why is that so? And now it's official a freeze, I think, of the weapons export. And is that explicitly for every EU member, underwritten by every EU member state? Because the conclusions were a little bit vague about it.
No, they were not vague. They're very clear, I think. And there is a clear commitment from member states. And when we say member states, we say all member states that commit to strong national positions regarding their arms export policy to Turkey on the basis of the provision of the common position on arms export control. This means that there is, yes, a halt in the export policies. The reason why this is not happening through a formal establishment of an arms embargo that goes through the procedural working groups and decision making is, on one side, that this is this mechanism allows for a more immediate decision making that can be taken at national level and can be supervised and coordinated at European Union level. So it's faster in its implementation. But also, if you look at the list of countries on which the European Union has a formal European Union arms embargo restrictive framework, you will not find, well, you would find mainly countries that, for which an arms embargo is foreseen by the UN Security Council resolutions, and this is not the case. Because normally, well, in most cases, the European Union sanction policy implements UN Security Council resolutions. Not always, not only, but in most cases. And in particular, when it comes to arms embargo, think of Libya, we're implementing a UN Security Council resolution in that case. Or you would find a certain number of countries that are definitely into different situations than a NATO ally is. Again, this is a question more for NATO than for me, but as we have so many EU member states that are also NATO allies, and as there are some provisions among NATO allies when it comes to the technicalities of exporting arms, we do not want member states that are also NATO allies to be in a complicated legal position when it comes to enforcing a European Union framework of arms embargo that is formally taken. So this formula, sorry if it's a bit technical, but I guess you get the nuances. This formula allows every country, every EU member state, to abide by the common position that is a European Union common position on arms embargo, having the same effect of an arms embargo, but without putting into question their belonging to the NATO alliance in case they are members of the NATO alliance.
Barza Hassan, reporter from Khorasan 24. It is maybe it's a little bit maybe too late to do any action from the European Union, because everybody knows yesterday Kurdish authority with the Syrian government and Russia, they have deal. So unfortunately, I think it is very too late, because during 3 or 5 years ago, the Kurdish, they have been died more than 10,000 Kurdish fighters during defeated ISIS, but the European Union and the USA, they just ignore it. Thank you.
I don't see the question. Sorry. We can move on.
Your reaction, please. Do you think it's too late to do any action from the European Union? Because yesterday, the Kurdish authority with Russia and Syria, they have a deal. So what's your reaction?
I think it's never too late to do the right thing. And I can definitely not respond for the US policy on their allies on the ground in northeast Syria. This is something you should ask those that have been fighting on the ground, starting with the US troops that are now being withdrawn. I think I repeated several times in this room and in Brussels, the European Union as such has never been a military player in Syria for a specific reason, that we have always believed that there's even too many armies in Syria. We believe that the way forward is and should be the political process and not the arms and the armies that are fighting in that territory. And I've seen that some have mentioned the fact that the European Union is not in these days able to stop the Turkish military activities in northeast Syria because we don't have an army. Our member states do have armies, but they are not in that territory in Syria. This means that the reason why we're not militarily present there is because we have always believed that the way is not fighting on the ground from the European countries, but it is to support the UN mediation process and find a way out to the Syrian conflict through diplomacy and in particular through the full implementation of 2254. Having said that, the war against Daesh has happened on the ground, has happened including with our support, including from the European Union to all the forces that have been fighting Daesh on the ground, including the Kurdish forces, consistently and all over these years. This support has never been taken away from the European Union side. I remember I've personally had long hours of discussion with my Turkish counterparts about that. The European Union has always been consistent on this. Having said that, one of the consequences that we have warned before the military intervention in northeast Syria from the Turkish side had started was exactly this, that this would have pushed the Kurdish forces in the hands of the Assad regime and the Russians. And this is something that definitely we didn't want to see, because we believe that one thing is the fight against Daesh, the other thing is finding a political solution to the conflict in Syria. That will have to include some elements of accountability for the crimes that have been committed by the Syrian regime against its own people. So the level of complexity of the different problems that now will have to be solved increases. I believe that this would be the moment for other global powers to sit together and see how they can put an end to this. Because I believe that regardless of our differences, we all share one common goal, and that is putting an end finally to the war in Syria. And we know what is the way forward to that. It's written in the UN Security Council Resolution 2254. We started to work on this in some years back. I believe that this would be the right moment to restart working on that. But again, it's clear that the situation on the ground and the raising tensions among the regional powers and the global powers is not conducive to that. But this is the European position. We believe that this would be the wise thing to do.
Nuruddin Faridi from the Arabian News Channel. Madam Mogherini, the coming back of the Syrian regime forces to the border between Syria and Turkey, do you see it a factor of stabilization helpful factor in the fight against Daesh? And is there any move after the discussion today that the European Union member states may decide to bring back their foreign fighters, nationals?
This is not one issue that this is not an issue we discussed today with the ministers. In fact, you do not see this reflected in the Council conclusions. This is an issue that we discussed in recent months. It's not necessarily competence of the foreign ministers. You know that different member states have different legal frameworks for addressing this issue of the foreign fighters. It's mainly a mix of competences between foreign ministers, defense ministers, interior ministers, justice and home affairs, and in some cases even social affairs, because when you have minors, this is an issue also of social protection. On this, the competence is a member state's competence. I've always offered member states support if they want some coordinating space for addressing this. But again, this is not something we've discussed today.
Paddy Smith, Irish Times. I wanted just to ask you about the NATO membership of many member states and the extent to which that has inhibited decision-making today. Because it's clear, for example, that the use of the word condemn was problematic, probably because of wanting to show deference to a fellow NATO member. It's clear that there are problems with the embargo because of NATO obligations of member states. And I understand that one minister raised the possibility of having to consider in the future Article 5 commitments by NATO members should, for example, the state of Turkey come under attack from Syria. Is this it must be the first time the membership of NATO has actually become problematic in a way for EU decision making?
I wouldn't say that this has been problematic for the EU decision-making, no. I guess this might be problematic, this situation might be problematic for NATO, but it's something you have to ask NATO. But it doesn't have an impact on the EU decision-making. In fact, we have a common position today. But I guess that, yes, it might be quite complicated for NATO to handle a situation like this, but this is not for the European Union.
My name is Ala Shali from Rudao Media Network from Kurdistan, Iraq. My question is, Madam Mogherini, do you think that weapons embargo is enough to stop Turkey? What's about economic embargo? Do you think about the next step will be economic sanction by Turkey? You know, I think you have seen that military operation by Turkey killed a lot of civilians, and the courts say we don't have any option. We have to cooperate with Assad. The situation is very difficult for Kurds. What can EU do? What need to do now to stop Turkey? That's important.
You know, you often say the European Union doesn't speak with one voice. And this time we spoke with one voice, exactly when it was needed, Tuesday, Wednesday, even Monday. I was in Jordan when the news came. So we spoke united with one voice, with very clear messages, and we asked from the very beginning Turkey to, first of all, not to start a military action in the northeast of Syria and then to stop it. So in this case, we had one clear, united voice. As many others in the world, maybe not everybody was as clear and as timely as we were, but the common message came in a certain coordinated manner. This didn't stop the Turkish military activity. Now we're taking a further step. So, in one sense, I'm glad that in this occasion, the European Union and the Member States not only able to speak with one voice, but also to act in unison. And we take a further step. Will that be enough? We'll see. What will be decided if that is not enough is something that we will discuss afterwards. The European Council will have a meeting later this week. I imagine that they will endorse our decisions today and obviously see how the situation develops on the ground. Further steps can always be taken in one sense or another. But I get the sense of the profound sense of your question. There is also an element of frustration, I believe, not only for me but for many around the world. What can be effective in stopping this military operation? This is a question. This is the $1 million question. What we can try to do is again to use all our means to try and put pressure, making clear that this is not a way for us to enter into a zone of conflictuality with Turkey. We also state in the conclusions that we consider Turkey as a partner, as an important partner, but we believe that what it is doing is wrong in this case. Will that be enough to stop the military action? We'll see. But I think that the Turkish authorities will need to consider the fact that all their interlocutors and friends and allies in the world are asking them to stop.
I take a couple of more questions. I'm sorry, we need to move on. A couple of more questions and then we really need to conclude. First, Damon and then Kamisia.
Hello, Damon Wake from AFP. Just going back to this, the conclusions on Syria and the sort of arms embargo in inverted commas. Now, I just want to be absolutely clear on the effect of what has been agreed today, because you said earlier that the formula allows every country, every member state, to abide by the common EU position, and then you said this has the same effect as an arms embargo. But obviously an arms embargo would oblige countries to halt their arms exports. So does today's conclusion, does it oblige member states to stop their arms export, or does it only enable them, and are they free to continue if they see fit?
Member states are always allowed to comply with common positions of the European Union. What they've done today is they have committed to do it. And this is a Council conclusion. So it's a formal European Union document. They have all subscribed to. They're all shaped. It's their own wording, and that we have shaped together with long discussions and preparation, and a lot of also legal work behind that. This is not just allowing them to do it. They have committed to do it today, each and every one of the 28, under a common position of the European Union. So the effect is the same.
Are they obliged to do it, though? Are they obliged?
The commitment is there, as well as whenever we have a formal, for instance, restrictive measure framework, member states are committed to implement it. Then it's their national legal responsibility to do it. The framework is exactly the same. We have a common framework that is a common position of the European Union, and the commitment of member states to abide, to implement this common position on a national level. Some of them even have more advanced national legislation. Some others will need to work on it. And the important thing to me is that we will gather the relevant Council working group already, I don't know if I can say this publicly, but in the next couple of days, let's say so, to have a common monitoring of where different member states stand in this commitment and in implementation of this commitment that they've taken today.
Oui, une petite question sur les fonds.
Brief question on drilling. I'd like to know whether you're going to propose names of companies or people involved in drilling who are going to be listed. Is it just an empty box at this stage? What do you expect Turkey to do before you start putting names into the empty box?
En français m'échappe. Je vais étudier pour ça, mais in English, on the drillings, to recall a bit the history of that, in June, and in May and June, we already addressed the situation. In the beginning of July, in the European Council, in the end of June, beginning of July, I was asked, together with the Commission, from the European Council, to present options on possible restrictive measures, targeted measures. We presented these options in the beginning of July. On the 9th, on the 15th of July, the Foreign Affairs Council adopted conclusions asking us to continue working on these options. We have done so over the summer, and I want to thank not only our technical teams, but also all the member states, and in particular the authorities of Cyprus, with whom I have constantly been in contact in these months, to monitor the situation very closely. And then today, what the ministers, what the Council has done is the political decision that is taken to establish the framework. Now, what will happen in the coming days will be, as I explained, the necessary legal acts to put this legal framework in place. And then, obviously, as any time that we have a framework for targeted measures or restrictive measures in place, the filling in of the framework, the names of natural and legal persons, will have to be based on concrete suggestions that will normally come from member states with solid legal basis. And so the filling in on the framework will depend on what kind of proposals will be done at that stage. But the agreement, the decision to put in place the framework regime of restrictive measures has been taken today.
I'm afraid we'll have to conclude at this point, but maybe see you in November. Thank you very much.